I started not working in the industry, but I started making films when I was 10 or 11 years old. And I think I knew, with the kids in the neighborhood, we would do little spoofs and things like that with my dad's Super 8 camera. And I think at that point in my life, I kind of had set a direction. 10 years old, as crazy as that sounds. Um, I thought telling stories with a camera was the coolest thing you could do, and I thought if there's any way one could make a life out of this, make a living, that's what I wanted to do. And I grew up in the suburbs of Boston. There wasn't a film industry. I didn't have any sort of familial connections to anyone in the film industry. So for me, it was really a fantasy. But as I got older and I continued to make films and take pictures, I think that my resolve solidified, and I was committed. I went to college for filmmaking in Ithaca, New York. Immediately after that, I got hired at a place I had done an internship. It was a small production company that was sort of like a boutique company, and we would do everything from industrials, commercials, instructional films, documentaries, you name it. We did a little bit of everything. It was a great way to start. That was in 83, 1983, I started working there. And I would take the equipment home on the weekends, and I would continue to make films. And at that time, music video was burgeoning. So I would hook up with local Boston bands and make music videos on the weekends, and basically whatever I could do to keep on shooting. Eventually, I left that job, went freelance in Boston for several years, and then moved to New York. I felt I had outgrown a small community of Boston and what the opportunities there would afford. So I moved to New York in 1990. Yeah, 1990. I moved to New York and I started over basically. I was going back and forth between Boston and New York. I was still doing a lot of work in Boston, but trying to get that foot in the door. And eventually it happened. It took about a year and a half. I finally got an agent in New York. And at that point, I went from doing regional stuff to suddenly doing more national stuff. And my dream at that point had always been to do a movie. I wanted to do my first feature, and I got that opportunity around 91 or 92. A small independently financed movie, and continue to do commercials and continue to pursue features and storytelling. Essentially, it came down to telling stories. That's what I really wanted to do. My career led me to a place where I was making money doing commercials, and that afforded me the luxury of taking on pro bono work for short films and things like that, which I continued to do until I got a very big break in working with Gavin O'Connor on a movie called Tumbleweeds, which we did it was really my first successful movie where we sold it at Sundance, and we had that whole experience of Sundance and bidding wars and the thrill of that. That was just remarkable. And then Gavin and I went on after that to do Miracle, which was the first studio film I had ever done for Disney, and still continued to keep my feet in commercials because they weren't exactly banging down the door for features. The competition is so intense in our field that even if you do have a movie under your belt, everyone else does too. Everyone you're competing against probably has 10 times more. So I was constantly, when you think you get to the top of this mountain, you realize that you're at the foothills of the next mountain. And that's kind of how I see this career. Like you set a goal and you achieve that goal, and then you realize that that's not that it goes farther than that you didn't see the other mountains behind that mountain. And so I continue to climb those mountains up and down. And after 30 something years in the business, it doesn't really change. I think the more success you have, the more competition you have, because there's a lot of great people out there doing what we do. But you just have to stay with it. You just have to keep your goals in focus and continue to pursue them, and I continue that to this day. You know what? I have to be moved on a human level by the story, and the story has to have some element of truth to it. And then I try to create the environment and the frame to capture that truth, whatever that happens to be. And it varies. I mean, even in a show like The Boys, it's always about grounding that story and making it real, and making it relatable. Even though it's fantastical, it's what makes it work is that it's rooted in reality, and it's got a certain grittiness and a certain spontaneity. I think that's really important. That's an example of that. Another the counterpoint to that would be The Patient, my most recent project, where in so many ways I took on The Patient as a reaction to working on The Boys for years. The Boys is huge, and it's a giant cast, and you may work with the same actor once a week, because everything is so spread out and everything is so large and so overwhelming. And then I was offered this show that's about two people in a basement. It didn't take much more than that for me to say, I'm in. Let's try this. So and essentially the core of my creative process is no different. I'm still trying to capture the reality, capture the truth of that situation of being trapped in a basement. We invented the way the light would move across the space and created that. We had maps and we had sun path and this is on the studio I'm talking, so that every scene has a specific time of day, a specific weather, a specific humidity even to it. Sometimes we would wet the window, sometimes we would make it rain, sometimes we really wanted to create a reality that you would get in a space like that. And I found that really challenging. And then from a framing standpoint, yes, it's two people in a basement. It's very funny because Kevin Bray, who was one of the directors on the show, said to me, we were in prep and I didn't do his episodes, but he said to me, I don't know how we're going to shoot this thing. You're in a basement and it's wide open. There's no foreground. There's nothing. And I said, Kevin, exactly. That's the challenge. And that's, this is not the show where you're shooting through a whole bunch of things. This show, it's about the graphic space and how do we impose this space to help tell the story? How do we make the angles of this place dynamic and a part of what Steve Carell's character is going through, the overwhelming ceiling pushing down on him and the bare walls just reflecting daylight, even his glasses reflecting the sliding glass door, suggesting the outside world that he can't get to, making another level of his torture. And again, that comes down to the truth and telling the truth of the story and finding the truth in the physical elements to support what Joel and Joe created, the story that they created, which is fantastic and an incredible psychological journey on so many levels from everybody. For every character, we kind of get into their heads a little bit. And I think in order to do that, you have to create a template, an environment that people can relate to as real. That's just where I am coming from. That's kind of what I am trying to do. Maybe someday I'll do something more fantastical. I don't know, but right now, my inspirations are people like Dante Spinotti and Roger Deakins and cinematographers who embrace realism and who use realism to elevate the writing, to elevate the performance, to create the environment for the actor to be that in that space, in that real space. And I have to say, I'm going back to The Patient now for a second. How profoundly it affected all of us to be working on that set day after day after day. We really started to feel like Alan's character probably felt. We felt I can speak for myself. I felt trapped in there. I felt like I was in prison. I felt like I had a chain on my leg because it was, 14 hours every day in this space. I mean, occasionally we would go out and we would do some exterior work, but for the most part, the bulk of it took place. It was like an acting test tube. It all happened in this little space, and that reflected the oppression of that reflected in the performances of everybody in the show. I mean, it also affected my performance as a cinematographer in how do I capture this feeling that I'm having, this claustrophobic feeling. How do I put that in a frame? And so that was a wonderful challenge. Very, like I said, very different from The Boys, which was much more epic in scope. The Boys was fascinating to me because, well, I'll give you an example of the process there, because I think it's really interesting. It's not something that gets talked about a lot, but on that particular show, when we're in prep, we would get the scripts. We would page turn through them along with the stunt department and special effects, visual effects. We would talk about each one of these gags or each one of these scenes and how best to do them. We would also, in these meetings, we would come up with different ways than what's scripted. We would come up with variations on what the script was. And Eric Kripke, the showrunner, was fantastic. He was Skyped into these meetings too. And the meetings would end up being like this wonderful, creative back and forth where every department would have a say. So then what would happen is, say it was something that we just couldn't do. So we would say, well, you know what? That is not something that we can afford because it's COVID and all the extras required, but whatever the thing was, we would figure out ways around whatever problems that we had. And then we would proceed. And I found it fascinating. Like I'll take for an example in episode season 3, the Herogasm episode with a big fight between Butcher and Soldier Boy and Homelander and Huey. And how that all worked was the beats were written out fairly specifically. So what happened next was that the stunt department started to break down the fight, and they do what's called they do a little film. They make a little film with their stunt people of exactly what beats are in the fight. So we wait for that to happen. Then that comes through and we all get that. We all go through that. We talk about the beats. Now we have a sort of template on how to shoot it, because we know exactly where all the punches are. We know where all the hits are. We know, because we've gone through with special effects and visual effects, the shots that are special effects or visual effects, whether it's flying a man on a wire across the room or whether it's computer generated, flying the man across the room, whatever that is, we've sort of determined that. And then we go to set and we start making it real. The actors have seen these films too, and the actors have been rehearsing this fight for weeks, obsessively, I might add. I mean, every single punch, and Carl and Anthony, they're incredible. They want to keep on doing it. They're like kids playing baseball and the lights are out. You say, you got to come in. They don't want to come in. They want to keep on doing it. And it shows. I mean, it really shows. But that's kind of the process. And that explains a little bit of the largeness of that project. And this is all happening weeks and weeks and weeks before we shoot it. So the schedule is a very protracted event that may start. You may read a script in October and you may not shoot it until February. And all of that time between October and February, you're having meetings, you're talking about every beat, you're talking about every aspect of it, every element of it. Where the patient was not quite as intense in terms of the preparation. It was a little bit more from my aspect, from a photographic standpoint, although I knew where the sun was going and I knew what the weather was because we had charted all of that out ahead of time, I still had to take in a scene, take in the rehearsal, really understand what the subtext of the scene was, where the characters were coming from, and then try to work our large plan into shots and tell the story that way. So it was a little bit more spontaneous, I guess, than The Boys, which, Boys had its opportunities to be spontaneous too, but not when there's so many departments involved and not when it's so big. Well, I think it's in a lot of ways it's reflected by the story, and I mean these are two really good examples, The Patient and The Boys. That the Patient was a very claustrophobic and tight, and we were working in small spaces, and there were, as you can imagine, there were a lot of crew people jammed into every space that wasn't on camera. We built that set in order to accommodate putting the camera wherever we wanted to at any given moment. The ceilings all were on motors and they flew, and the walls all flew, and basically the whole set could come apart, so we could bring in a big crane and do a lot of these shots, these big moves and high angles and things like that. So I think, I think the general ambience of that set was, for claustrophobia, added to the COVID and wearing masks, and being in that tight space. The other thing to realize too, that probably a lot of people don't understand, is that when you're in a studio like that, it's very dark. It's a dark space. The only light that's on are the lights that you're shining, either on the set or a little light here and there for safety, so people don't trip over cables and things like that. But you're in a big, dark warehouse of a space, and that wears on you. That wears on your humor. It wears on your exhaustion. And day in and day out, being in this dark space, creating this dark story, it affected everyone, I think. And on The Boys, because it was such a big cast, and every scene was so different, and it had a lightness to it that was a little bit different. I mean, yes, we were blowing up heads and we were doing gory, disgusting things, but when you're doing that on set, it's not real, and it's not real, and the blood isn't real. There was something more real about Alan and Sam's predicament in a lot of ways than in The Boys, in terms of being a crew member and being a part of that. You break it down technically when it's something like a person's face getting ripped off. You break it down into what those elements are, and they're silicone and plastic and fake blood, and that's fine. None of it's really real. When I watch it, it affects me viscerally, but when I'm shooting it, not so much, because it's just kind of cool and kind of fun. But in The Boys, the lock on Steve Carell's ankle was real, and the chain was real, and he was really locked in. He wanted to be locked in. He spent most of the day locked in. He kept a key in his pocket in case there was an earthquake or some other kind of emergency that we could get him out. But he wanted to wear that, even when you don't see it, even when it's not on camera. He was wearing that shackle because it put him in this mental space, and in so many ways, we all were wearing the shackle. Well, I think, we all have our heroes. I think for me, my cinematographer hero would probably be Roger Deakins. And I think that I approach my task similar to the way he does, and that his work has a realism to it. It's beautiful. It's natural. It's real. You feel the light in a space and believe it. It's not a ton of backlight. It's not glamorous. It just is. And when I'm stuck, when I'm trying to figure out how to do something, I'll say to myself, what would Roger Deakins do in this case? And it's usually the simplest solution. If there's too many lights on, that's, that every light's a problem. So every time you turn on another light, you're creating another thing that needs to be flagged and shaped and kept off this area and kept off that area. So simple process, simple big source, simple single source if possible. That's kind of my approach. So movies like No Country for Old Men or Beautiful Mind, they're from a lighting standpoint, they really they're magnificent to look at, but they're real. They don't look artificial at all. In terms of technically, what he did in 1917 was fantastic. Nobody ever needs to do a single take movie ever again. It was so good and it was so perfect. And it's a hard thing to do. Other films, Raging Bull, I mean, Michael Chapman's use of black and white was just fantastic, and how he put the camera. The Godfathers 1 and 2, Gordon Willis, again, another master painter with light. There's every frame in that movie, and the elegance with which the story is told, the economy, and that's another thing I love about Deakins is the camera doesn't move unless it's drawn to move, unless it's part of the story, unless it's telling part of the story. So everything is by design. A crane shot resolves itself. It doesn't just float through the air. It comes down and lands from a big wide shot to a close-up or something along those lines. That's what inspires me. That's what kind of I'm always trying to get to and that's frustrating too, because it's not in your hand. It's not up to you. It's up to the editor. But you hope that they will let your shot resolve. And I talk to the editor. They'll like, come to the ending. There's a great ending. Ends in a close-up. Don't cut out early. And, you're always fighting that. Everyone has their own ticking clock, so to speak. Then we had to take off 3 seconds. Well, take it off over here, Don. But yeah, that sort of thing. What else? Younger DPs, I love Steven Meisler's work. Godless was fantastic, really inspiring Western, beautiful use of anamorphic frame and spacing. His work in the chess show was fantastic as well. I feel like we all come from the same DNA, where we're trying to elegantly tell stories in a natural environment, but finding the beauty in that nature, and finding the beauty in that truth, and to do all of that, to balance all that, along with keeping your lead actor and actress looking beautiful and making them happy so that they're comfortable in their performance. It's all part of the juggling act that we do. I mean, for me, I'm always trying to get at the truth, but the truth of it is that the truth isn't always cosmetically pretty. So what I try to do is take the kernel of that truth, shape it, bend it in a way that there's nice contrast ratio, that the eyes are well lit, that the shadows are being filled in an elegant and soft way. So I think that's kind of where we all kind of come at it from. Yes, I would say you have to have initiative. You cannot wait around to be told what to do. You need to find things to do. You have to impress the people who have hired you and show that you are capable of a lot more. Of course, attitude goes a long way. Being early goes a long way. Persistence goes a long way. It's not a very easy field to enter. So it's not going to be a knock on the door, come on in and go to work. It's something you're going to have to face a lot of rejection, and you're going to have to face a lot of calling people over and over again. If they tell you to call in 3 months, call them in 3 months. Put it in your calendar. Do all of that stuff, and if you really, really want it, you'll find your way into it, and you'll find yourself in the film industry, and that's my best advice. My dream. Well, gosh, I'm living it. I'm living my dream. I mean, I just want it to continue. I just want to be able to choose projects that come my way, and to keep exploring myself as an artist, and seeing what I can contribute, and carry forth. I would love to do another feature, but that's not that important. It's really not important to me. I think television is so good, and Uh, it gives you pretty much everything that features give you, except that it's maybe a longer running project. And I love that. I love the idea of telling a story over 10 episodes. For me as an artist, it gives me the ability to really let my work breathe and allow it to change and allow it to morph, just like the writing does, just like the acting does, just like everything else. Whereas I think in features, you kind of get the script. Okay, it's 100 pages, and we're going to prep it, and we're going to plan all this stuff out, and we're going to shoot it all out of order. And you got to have a plan in your head. You got to know exactly what you want it to look like. Because it's not linear. You're not doing the stuff in order. On a television show, you're not doing every scene in order, of course, but you're doing episodes in order, and you can track where you are, and you can allow that arc to happen. And I feel like it's a bigger canvas for a cinematographer, as it would be for an actor. Same thing for an actor. They take on a role, and they may read the pilot and say, yes, I'm in. By the last episode of the season, their character may have completely changed into something else. They don't know that. It's fun. It's fun to find out. It's a living, breathing thing. I think it's like theater in that way. Every time play gets put up, it's a little bit different, right? And it evolves as time goes on, and the things that work and the things that get reactions, the right reactions, they grow, and the other things atrophy. And it's very much like that. It's very much like that. If there's an actor who is terrible, they can kill him in a TV show. They can get rid of him. They can do a million things. Features, just it's a little bit more locked in. But I do miss the event of the motion picture. Television, yes, it premieres and then it runs, and it's just out there to be grabbed onto. It's not like people assemble in the dark and share the experience. There's nothing quite like that. And I do miss that. I do miss sitting in a theater and experiencing with actual living people your work on screen. Nothing compares to that.